Eventually, the man who took over from Lenin was Stalin, who was to become known as one of the two most brutal people of the 20th century, along with Hitler. Stalin was from a part of the Tsarist Empire called Georgia. His real name, Joseph Vissarionovich Djugashvili. As a young man, he trained to be a priest. But this career came to a halt when he joined a forerunner of the Bolsheviks and took part in fundraising activities for them. Maybe he considered holding jumble sales or a sponsored bouncy castle morning, but in the end, he decided on robbing banks. Stalin was never a leading figure in the Bolsheviks early on, but when Lenin was shot, it was Stalin who became the General Secretary of the Bolsheviks, who by then had changed their name to the Communist Party. By now, Lenin was desperately ill, and as he lay dying, Lenin fell out with Stalin, saying, "I suggest the comrades remove Comrade Stalin and appoint in his place a man who in all respects differs from him." His main complaint against Stalin was the brilliant one that Stalin had been rude to Lenin's wife. But Lenin didn't get his wish, and in 1924 he died. And at this point, Stalin and Trotsky became bitter rivals. Trotsky said the only way that the revolution could survive would be if there were revolutions in other countries across Europe that could help the Russians out. But Stalin said this didn't matter, and they should concentrate on creating socialism in one country. So at one conference, Stalin said, "We can build socialism in one country if we ignore the international situation." And Trotsky shouted back, "We could walk naked through the streets of Moscow in January if we ignore the police and the snow." The main weakness of Trotsky's case was that while there had been revolutions across Europe after the First World War, none of them had succeeded in taking power. So now Trotsky's argument about wanting international revolution just didn't seem to make any sense. In any case, Russia had fallen apart from 4 years of war with Germany, 3 years of civil war, from starvation and cold. The most enthusiastic supporters of the revolution from the cities had been killed in the civil war. Stalin rose to power when he became a priest, chief fundraiser for the Bolsheviks, general secretary of the party. After Lenin's death, Stalin's opponent for control of the Communist Party was Trotsky, Joseph Vissarionovich Djugashvili, Lenin's wife. Stalin wanted international revolution, socialism in one country, war with Germany. In 1928, Stalin had several of his opponents shot or imprisoned, so at the end of that year there were 10 times as many people in jail as at the beginning, and Trotsky was sent into exile. Once he'd gained power, Stalin had a plan, which he called the 5-year plan. The idea was for this vast, depleted country to catch up with Western industry at a massive rate, no matter how great the human cost. He said, "We must catch up with America in 10 to 15 years, or they will crush us." The method was to rapidly build vast factories and plants and feed the country by forcing peasants into collective farms, or kolkhozy in Russia, at gunpoint, where they'd be made to grow grain as Stalin and his government ordered. This also forced 17 million people to leave the countryside and work in the new factories in the towns. But many peasants burnt their crops rather than hand them over, so millions of them were executed or starved. And the result of all this was not more food, but widespread famine. Now the thing is, with a project like that, it just can't allow for any opposition. So inside the Communist Party, anybody who opposed Stalin, which was almost anyone who'd led the revolution, was accused of extraordinary crimes and executed. For example, 2 old Bolsheviks, Zinoviev and Kamenev, were accused of working with Hitler and forced to make confessions during what became known as the Moscow trials. Almost every member of Trotsky's family was murdered. Thousands of people suspected of opposing Stalin were put into political prisons known as the Gulag, and every aspect of society was geared towards praising Stalin. For example, the poet Peter Vechura wrote in the Communist Party newspaper Pravda, "Stalin's greatness is a halo around the constellations of the firmament, around men and factories." How did anyone write a review of stuff like this? But the truth is, no one dare do anything else but agree. Stalin's industrial plan to catch up with the West was called the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the 15-year plan. A kolkhoz is a political prison, a poem praising Stalin, a collective farm. Zinoviev and Kamenev were disgraced Bolsheviks, German collaborators, Russian car manufacturers. In 1936, Stalin introduced a new constitution which allowed voting to take place in some parts of the Communist Party, but the Communist Party still controlled every aspect of society, including art and music. And the voting was a bit limited. For example, at an election to local Soviets in 1947, Stalin came top with 2,122 votes. Then it was discovered the constituency only had 1,617 voters. So the next day, Pravda reported, "The extra ballot papers were put into urns by citizens of neighbouring constituencies, anxious to express their gratitude." Perhaps the most astonishing thing of all about Stalin is that despite all of this, for millions of people around the world, he remained a hero. Communist Party members in other countries loved him. A bit like these women who have awful boyfriends, so other people would say, "Can't you see he's starving peasants and fiddling votes and murdering opponents?" And his supporters would go, "Oh, but you don't see the gentler side of him like I do." There's no doubt that his methods did lead to the USSR being transformed from a vast rural backward area to an industrialised nation, but the cost was millions of lives and any freedom for those that survived. But he was also loved by a generation of people in Britain because he led Russia on the side of the Allies against the Germans in the Second World War. He even became known throughout the country as Uncle Joe, because Stalin was just like any friendly uncle who might pop round on a Sunday afternoon for dinner. Except that he'd take your roast potatoes and send them to the city, herd you into the garden at gunpoint, shoot your gran for being too slow getting there, and announce that the 5 of you left had voted him the most fun member of the family by 27 votes to 0. The Communist Party was the only party in Russia. Got more votes than voters. Became an industrial nation at the cost of millions of lives. The Communist Party newspaper was Kulak, Pravda, Gulag. In Britain, Stalin was feared and hated. Nicknamed Uncle Joe, named the Stalin after a popular bird.